Is 30,000 still possible?
It can only furnish some parts. Designer always struggled in between durability, functionality, as well as the sustainability.
But then after that, right, they suffer the wrath of the homeowner because 3 months after staying in, don't know what this designer was thinking. Like that. And then we bear the brunt of it.
To designers, it's a disservice that they doubt that you could deliver a functional space.
When it don't work, that's where function fails.
I don't think we can take function out of the equation, because otherwise then what is the meaning of design?
Renovation isn't just about tiles and mood boards. It's about people and the personalities, as well as the stories that help make the decisions. I'm Astley Ng, aka The Designer. Join me for the Season 2 of the SIXiDER Show. Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of the SIXiDER Show Season 2. And today we are joined by two of my favourite designers in Singapore. We have Dennis Cheok from Upstairs, not Downstairs. And then we got Jackie Lai from M Sparkle. They both had appeared in our Season 1. So, Jack, let's start with Dennis.
I run a firm in Singapore called Upstairs, UPSTRS, without the A and the I. We design spaces, experiences.
Okay, let's go to Jackie. Jackie's name has got A and I inside.
Okay, my name is Jackie Lai. I'm a design director for MCC Singapore. I'm in this IT department called M Sparkle, which is part of MCC Singapore. So MCC Singapore is a builder and developer. It's a China-based company, and currently we are building Resort World 2.0, and we just finished Rainforest Asia, which is also one of our key projects. Yeah. On the other hand, I'm also have my own consultancy called Jia Studios. We are still very active, and I'm doing design consultancy in that sense. And besides that, I'm still a young lecturer in Temasek Poly.
I know the both of you do a lot of commercial job. So let's talk about weightage. How many percent is on commercial? How many percent is actually on residential? Dennis?
For me, it's interesting. I started out strictly commercial. So retail, F&B, hospitality, everything except residential. So I started out that way progressively, and also through word of mouth, more and more heavily dependent on private clients. So that was the first 10, 12 years of the career, and we slowly got back into designing for brands and entities. So I would say at this point in time, it will be 60-70% private residences of all scales and range, and the remainder being retail, commercial, hospitality.
Career-wise?
Career-wise, 50-50. Yeah, though what's interesting now is that we're shifting back towards development, and that experience working with private clients was very rewarding in that we got very, 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 very deep in user experience. Let's say we design a hotel room and then the guest suite. How one uses the room from day to night. Is it a female user versus a male user? How much time do they spend in various spaces? Bathrooms are very critical. So that's fun. And the other extent of it would be how we see a person or a personality as a brand and translate that into space. In fact, that was one of the hardest things to do, because being commercially driven, conceptual ideation was the thing. You need to create a great concept for a commercial space, and that becomes a story. But so now in the situation of designing a home, how then do we kind of tease out and just a story that's relevant but also refreshing? So, and we did that for 10, 12, 15 years now. Yes, so I think we're ready to tackle bigger things.
Cool. Okay, let's talk about Jackie. Career-wise and current then.
As a design director at MCC Singapore, we do a lot of commercial offices for Chinese MNC. Sometimes it's some public spaces. We also involve in MRT spaces, some basement whatsoever. So of course, under MCC Singapore, it's mainly more commercial. Yeah. And of course, in my private practice is a mix of retail, because I did all the outlets for Natureland. Recently, I did a Korean restaurant and some residential. So now currently is very, very more inclined to commercial. I think 60 more commercial, 40 is residential. Because nowadays, not much residential. Only have a long-term client who keep coming back to me. I still have customers who still want to improve this and that for their houses.
So I'm going to segue to the topic of today, which is essentially about form and function. And why I'm asking that, right, specifically to understand the background that you both have, right, is that whether the argument exists, like for commercial projects due to branding and all that, the form factor is very important. Function may be less important. Or you want to debate that for homes, especially in the current state of things, right, where a lot of residential projects and all that are largely flats, BTOs, first-time homeowners who really don't know about functions. And so, again, they're also pushing for aesthetics. So what do you guys think about that?
I find the few statements that you have made highly debatable. I challenge everything that you said.
Sure.
First of all, the clientele right now are highly acute to the way that they live. So even if they're the first-time owners, I guarantee you, everyone knows inside out how they want to use this space. I think it's a result of the pandemic. We spend so much time at home. We start to think about what works, what doesn't, and most of all that boundary between what makes a home and what makes an office, it basically dissolves. We get quite a kick and we thrive out of creating homes that kind of transform, transition, expand, contract. That's, in retrospect, forms a huge part of our DNA. And that same mode of thinking, transformable spaces, creating third spaces within the public arena, within a commercial workspace, that is also a community space. That same thought could be expanded. But so now back to form and function. Where do I even go, right? I came from architecture school. So that's one of the first lessons. Form follows function. And if you would say that for commercial projects, there's more leeway and playing room for form, totally with you. But in a commercial context, every square footage is money. So if a client wants to commit to, let's say, having a $10 square feet showroom, and devote only 5%, 10% to visual merchandising and display of goods, Gentle Monster, for example, it's a very intentional marketing move because it then creates not just a retail experience, but a destination of fascination, right? And devote so much time to refreshing and curating the kind of sculptural artwork just to attract the crowds. Get social media soft marketing, even with the product branding, collaborations is a big thing. So it's a whole big marketing machine, and that translates into ROI for that square footage, right? Anyway, glasses, how much space does it take? So that's smart. But for the more compact commercial developments, and especially for F&B, I would say, how do you meet the kind of head count, pax count, table count, and how many rounds of dinners do you need to serve per night? How does the workflow go from back to the front? These are all very heavy considerations and all driven by pragmatics, function. That part needs to be solid when we design a commercial space before we can even talk about form. Thomas Hathaway boldly proclaimed, emotions are function. How do we then design for the human experience, the human emotion? Is it inconsequential? Do we not think about it? Do we not factor it into our design? I would say if you don't consider that, it's a missed opportunity.
Functions are derived from, I would say, a rich understanding of the context. Again, I'm going to give you an example. husband and wife getting married, first home, if they have never stayed together, they have not cohabited, right? They've never stayed together. It's two people coming together to figure out the nuances of and their lifestyles and all that. So, and then there's still the budget factor. And then there is that space that they try to say, this is mine, this is yours. And at some point, they meet at somewhere the neutral ground. And the key deciding thing may not be function. And again, this is just an argument based on that context, which is, I don't know you well enough, or rather we have not stayed together long enough to figure out what are all the nuances. So by I'll default to the aesthetic. And the kitchen should look like that, the bedroom should look like that, right? And then let's live together and then let's figure it out. And in that sense, would then function be something that you would pay for? Because in the grand scheme of things, like 30K, 50K renovation budget, what is definitely going to work may not be visual, may not be aesthetically pleasing. But then it's going to make a lot of sense. Like, I want this thing of a certain height because it's going to make ergonomics to me. But these are things that may not be 100% thought about. And then in commercial sense, if let's say this is a brand owner, they're just figuring out their brands and all that. The retail science or the F&B science is that I want to maximize, I want to optimize. And so that's about as far as it goes. But then still, I like today, like any cafe, there needs to be a 打卡, Wang Hong, that visual appeal is more important than anything.
Correct.
And whether it makes ROI or not, the functional sense, whether it's making people adapt a certain way. I've seen some top cafes in Singapore. They make us sit in like very uncomfortable stools, So the deal here is that whether it is driven by form or function, and it's contextual to the occupants, the users, to the brand owners, or to the customers. It's a very big, it's a very, very broad topic.
First of all, you hit many right notes there in saying that first-time owners typically give a brief, not so much by how they use the space. Usually we have to guide them on to lead them into thinking, how do you think you would like to live your daily life, and then how do we then design around that purpose and function. But typically the brief will be Pinterest images.
Yeah.
It's very aesthetically
very visual,
driven. Visual, exactly that. You spoke about that cafe that is very Wang Hong for people to 打卡. Well, your trending words are very on point. You spoke about the furniture that's not even so comfortable. My first question is that part of the design? Because it's an intentional... Yes.
Not to stay so long, right?
Yeah, that's what McDonald's does, right? Make it, you can sit, but barely enough, just enough to have that meal, and then you quickly...
So the function works for the brand owner.
Yes.
The shop owner. But the function doesn't work for the user. So that's why I say context to whoever's a perspective. But a home is very specific. It's the occupants, right?
We're talking about form and function, right? So most people may perceive these two like two opposing forces. But to me, it's about not choosing one over the other. It's more like how to integrate it together. So of course, even for the home, sometimes for functions, it's about fulfilling the foundation, how the flow works, how to support daily use, even for the family. The most important is the husband and wife must be comfortable using the space. Then the form is how functions are being expressed. So that's where we come in, doing proportion, doing colors, and sometimes even geometry. If it goes to the residential side, especially for first-time owners, because they do not have much experience and they may not have experience living together, and sometimes it narrows down who is the decision maker. Sometimes it could be one side driven because they haven't really started living together yet. Usually the main things, the function can agree together, and the form sometimes it could be driven by one side. Like I want this particular theme whatsoever. But of course, to us, most important, we have to create a home. It's still a house. And both of them must live harmony together. So sometimes we do have to be a peacemaker to make sure they reach out to a cohesive decision and solution together. Then we also have to plan like 5-10 years in a practical sense, in a function sense, potential how many keys and all these wardrobes currently could be a clothes first, but eventually it can evolve 5 years later become a children's clothes. For the commercial side, the integration is very important. A lot of restaurants initially they will tell me like, I need to fulfill tables and chairs. But of course, as interior designers, our first thing when we think of a retail space, especially for a restaurant, it's not about filling up tables.
Fire code.
The constraints like the site condition, the fire codes, that will affect the purity of an idea. But now when we design retail space or commercial space, especially in such a competitive world, it's the anticipation of space. So we have to think of the impression, what is the arrival, the anticipations, the lighting ambience, the table design. Before you even touch into food, the food quality became not that important. Of course, you are attracted by social media, but social media also drive by forms. How it looks is what it draws people. So it became a function. So form in this case became a function because it still brings people in. So commercial could be very, very different. Like forms is very form driven.
If I were to kind of sum it up, right, it's like the aspirational aspect, right, which is the aesthetics, even taka, whatever, right, gels together to become the new function. Because it seems to be what it's saying. The purity of function is that it serves a purpose.
Yes, it works.
Correct.
Yeah.
But then because the way the world is evolving, even like what you say, the feeling is a function. Getting to go to that place, I don't care about the food. I just want to taka. I want to show people that I have been here, and I want to let people know that I visited the place. That is that function. Then so you design for it. And again, back to residences, right? The impact for that, right, can be quite great because when it comes to home residential, even if it's a second home, right, they still aspire for a better living, a better condition. They really would not know the science behind it. And at the end of the day, I think it falls back to the professionals, you guys, right, to pick out what they are looking for, even gel that function, that aesthetics with the function together, and then still deliver something that meets the aspiration, but really could have some longevity. Then you don't hear them say, aspirationally, I would like to have a table that is ergonomic, or that my kitchen must have a work triangle. And then they don't talk about things like that. They talk about the forms and all that. And is this wrong? Because heading towards a world of AI, right? And you can just key in those prompts, right? The keywords that you're putting in would not be the functions. You'll probably be saying that, I want a Scandi look, I want Japandi, I want wabi-sabi, I want these textures, this color. And the AI is not going to tell you all the functional aspect of this. Then how? Then the world is going to be like this, full of designs that are like copy and paste. It's very AI. It's like all. Then I will argue that this becomes the AI slop of our interior design industry.
If a client comes to you and say, I need a kitchen that has work triangle,
yeah.
To designers it's a disservice that they doubt that you could deliver a functional kitchen or a home workspace, let's say, right? But if I were to go back a little bit, because I digressed, these are things that usually the non-designers will not think about. If something works, you wouldn't have to think about it. So going back to what you were talking about before the break, second-time homeowners, those are my favorite clients. Those that have already lived and spent significant time in a first home, let's say.
They know what failed.
They know what failed. So they'll be very specific in telling you, and these are very functional based criteria. They tell you, I host a lot. I like to face my guests when I'm cooking and serving so that my back is not turned to the party. They tell you things like that, or they tell you things like, my husband works at a different time zone than I do, so we need to put him in a separate space, but at the same time, we don't want to see his work during the day, so let's have it in a convertible space. So these are all design cues that we can very quickly find solutions for.
You mentioned that second-time homeowners or those who have renovated multiple times. It's like a funnel, isn't it? It's like eventually they like blank canvas to knowing what they want, and they can give you very specific brief, and then you catch those brief, and then you ideate further, and then you try to add more value to this. But the very initial start, that first client that came to you, they are really not giving you much to work with, and those kind of inhibit. And in the world of resi interior design, a large part of it's down to salesmanship. They focus on like, I want to close a deal, so I'm not going to intervene and spoil it for you. If you want pink, I'll give you pink lah. And then I'm not really going to trouble and say that I'm going to give you all the functional cues and tell you why pink will not work for you or whatever. But I'm just going to like meet all your aspirations. But then after that, right, they suffer the wrath of the homeowner because 3 months after staying in, I don't know what this designer was thinking. Like that. And then we bear the brunt of it. Isn't that the case?
Especially for first-time owners, they don't stay with each other. So a lot of them is through influence, could be external influence. And we have to piece them together and try to guide them along the way. And because they are first-time owners, we really have to tell them 5 years down the road, this will be some colors that you want, and do you need some texture whatsoever? Whether if there are no answer to it, we just see this as temporary colors. The wall had to be adaptable to be able to change over time to suit the future lifestyle. Eventually, they will get used to it, and maybe pink is not eventually what they want. Sometimes couple need trial and error to kind of fine tune, to know what they want and don't want for the house. If they really have no ideas, then of course usually I will share some case studies. If not, they will just piece hundreds of Pinterest which may not match from living to dining to the bedrooms. So we will tell them, okay, this is how I match for the entrance to the living to the dining. What kind of experience we'll get? What's the takeaway? What kind of memory you will give people who offer people when they left your homes. This is how we get to know each other, use our experience and the case studies and the memories with our other customers to share with them. So, of course, this may work out to be a very good friends, become a good relationship, connections with the designer, rather than just saying yes to everything. Of course, it's very fast and furious and just move on, 30,000, do everything with anything you want and just move on to another customer. But this is not what we want as complete designers lah, because we go for long-term connection.
Is 30,000 still possible?
There's still customers who tell you that they want 30,000. Then, of course, you will tell them that it can only furnish some parts lah.
To be honest, right, functions evolve. It's like you evolve, right? From not having a kid to having a kid, from not wanting a dog, then suddenly say, hey, let's have a dog. And your function suddenly evolved. But that space was designed with some permanence in mind, right? And this function is like that. Then how? Is it even an important discussion? Because like you, I think all designers were schooled that way. Form follows function. Yeah, but then the function evolves so rapidly, right? Even the way like today social media and all, right, it's like feelings is a function. Then is it even an important topic? Because previously a lot of things are more permanent than today. But today's context is that things are less permanent. A home probably last time can, take care of a kid for like 20, 30 years, until the kid grows up, marry off and all that. Today we're looking at people looking at MOP, 5 year, then move on, right? Maybe 10 years, and typically they basically go with the next property lah, So then is even function important?
I don't think we can take function out of the equation because if you do, then what exactly are we designing for? There's no parameter, no brief. The only response to that would be to design a blank canvas, which could be a brief, and then work not so much with custom builds and built-ins, like very purpose-driven pieces of fixed furniture, but to cater for and enable usage and function through things that are mobile, things that are configurable. That seems to be something that we utilize quite often these days, because you're right. Our lifestyles, our personalities can evolve quite quickly. I don't know what's happening. Things just move so quickly now. And to design so full on in a way, like a hotel room, everything is fixed in. Like, you don't want things to move. Only chairs you can move around. Right now, we design with some kind of flexibility in mind, not just the way furniture are used, but the way rooms kind of commutate. I spoke about this a little bit earlier. But I think it's a result of being superbly functionally driven, because you're anticipating function not just in the now, but let's say in 3 months' time, 3 years' time, and 5 years, when eventually the property gets sold, and then the users and our clients want to have something that they invested a lot of money on. A renovation is a lot of money. Even if it's 30K, that's a lot of money. They want to be able to know that whatever investment I'm putting in, I can take some of that with me. To answer that question, no, you can't take function out at all. Because otherwise, then what is the meaning of design?
Again, contextual, depending on what we are looking at. If we have a smart home scenario, and I was just having a conversation with a few smart home sellers, and one of the things that had brought up was that maybe the aspect of smart home has this very permanent and expensive element to it. Like, okay, we're going to do it, and it's all going to be wired, and then it's going to go to my DB box. I'm going to have drivers here and there. Then it's expensive, but technology just keep coming, and then it's going to be cheaper. And then, I'm going to be wasting that money, so don't do. I do piecemeal. And so the function is not designed in, or the smart home functions are not designed in. I'll just look at it piecemeal. And I'm saying this is because designers, right? You are kind of like designing a lifestyle. When we talk about residences, it's designing a pattern of usage. You're saying that the person's flow from waking up to the bathroom, to the kitchen, to then the hall, and then after that eventually going out of the house, and coming back, and so on and so forth, right? The actions, right, is a pattern that you're designing. And some of this integrates with technology, some of it integrates with hobbies, aspiration, and all that, but that's evolving so quickly. How can you know so much and anticipate all this and then put this into a permanent design that you can design the lifestyle, you can design the pattern of usage?
Just now, as you said, it moves so fast, and especially for the technology, sometimes when we cater for the smart home for the current time, you think you're future-proofing. Sometimes smart home vendors may change, there's a new one, and there's some integration that can work and that cannot work. Then smart home, your current smart home may be just obsolete because it moved from wired to wireless. Then you think that, okay, the smart home that I catered now, I think it can only last like 5-6 years. You say that it's future-proofing it? No, it's just improving your lifestyle to solve current issue like your current scene setting and whatsoever. So just now we talk about form and function and how the society has evolved in terms of homes. Because I did do a lot of offices. Offices, since pandemic, everything is talking about modular and high adaptability. So when we design things, it have to be movable. A meeting room can be a modular space. A pantry can be a meeting room. A pantry can be a speaker corner. So everything becomes modular. So when we start to design spaces like this, it becomes semi-public space. So homes could be like that. From a dining, it became a study. Of course, a dining can always be a multifunctional spaces, but most important, it shouldn't take up so much space that it cannot move around. Some people say that a good design means sometimes you may not even know the function immediately. It just works. A chair can be a coffee table and can be a table. It's like it can be a multifunctional use, being modular furniture, especially for office space. Really, it can be a coffee table, it can be a chair, it can be a stool, and it can be a storage. It be 4-in-1, 5-in-1, so functional. So houses also sometimes move into to this. There's some furniture designer going to this kind to make it very adaptive. So sometimes we have to design in a way that it has to be modular.
I'm not sure whether you all hear what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing is that with all this adaptability and you being resourceful with what's given to you, it's hardly saying that we are designing for that function, but rather we are designing for that adaptability, which is then questioning the purpose of the designer and the designer's profession, in the sense that we are designing for a specific purpose. There's some element of permanence, and because it has to serve that function.
Oh, because sometimes the way we design shape human behavior. What we design shape their habits, shape their behavior to in a better way.
But I think we need to then think about certain patterns, right? What are consistent? What are absolutely timeless needs under the broad umbrella of shelter and daily living? Surely they are. I mean, within a home we can talk so much, but you need a space to rest, to eat, to socialize, to decompress. So various archetypes do exist. How then do we enable certain sense of flexibility in usage? Then that depends on the genius of the author, the creative author, the one who designs it. So furniture that can perform many functions, does that take the creation or designer out of it? I beg to differ. Actually, it takes more thought to create a piece of furniture that can serve multiple purposes. But I mean, when Jackie was describing it, I got a little bit disturbed and depressed. Like, why is everything so demanding, you know? Like one chair needs to now be like 4, 5 other different things.
Transformers.
No money to buy.
Why can't the chair just be a chair, right? But I think in the broader sense, it seems to be a reflection of this world that we live in. In the workplace, we don't wear one hat anymore. We need to do many things at different times of day, or even do multiple things at one moment. And therefore, the furniture, the spaces that we inhabit needs to be as equally hardworking as we, the humans, are. Conversely, let's talk about safety in the design, right? One of my first projects is a boutique, flagship concept store. So it's about, just kind of dissecting familiar classic architecture. So cornices, we kind of sliced it into archways. You see a cross section. So that central seating area was a dissected version of a Chesterfield sofa. So what a beautiful quilted leather quilt work. But instead of that backrest, we had this steel plate, like polished chrome, brass tinted, surrounding it. It's beautiful to behold, but I think the edges were not kind of
Not far properly.
Yeah, finished
Not
properly.
bloody,
So the chief designer behind that label was like in the space. She had accidentally just knocked herself into a corner and just cut herself. Just that, it's a nick on the arm, but to me, just like, oh my, the space that you create hurts someone physically.
Okay, I want to zero in on that form and function element here already.
Oh no!
No, but this is exactly where function is so critical, right? That the way you were describing it, wow, so interesting. Chesterfield is so, round, tufted and all.
Yeah.
Voluptuous even, right? And then you have that sleek metal frame that you were describing it, but then it cuts, right? So one that's so soft, and then the other one, so the juxtapose are fine, no problem. But then workmanship wasn't there, and the workmanship is an integral function. It's an expected function, isn't it? And then that's where the form factor, like, kind of supersede the bare minimum function. We were talking about how maybe buildings have to serve and be adaptable and all that. In the world of sustainability, for instance, and passive design is a very real thing, right? So it's like if you can have ventilation, you can monsoon windows, don't be reliant on aircon, use natural ventilation. That's the rage these days, right? But these are very clear, specific functions that classically can probably withstand for a very long period of time, because who doesn't want fresh air? And I think those are the things that go beyond the conversation of just the basic form and function. It's like if you have a choice right now to do a resi project, and they're saying I want to change the windows, would you have opt for those kind of windows that I can just tuck away in one corner, very nice, you can see the whole view, or you would suggest windows with some louvers for that so that your building can perch, your interior space will perch. Yeah, so that's that kind of question that I'm asking lah.
It's something we always do, and I want to enable that. And interestingly, we have clients who are very much into it. In fact, right now we have a project, HDB apartment. The whole flat is conceived to be one that could breathe through. So much so that that wall of the master bedroom, we took it down, and in its place we designed this kind of pivoting walls that you turn one, the rest turns with it. Mm-hmm. It moves in tandem lah. That also stemmed from the client's very specific point of view. They were so passionate about not being wasteful that we salvaged old pieces of their furniture and created new work out of that. And we started talking to Roger and Sons as well, because they work with local trees. So to salvage parts of their old furniture to make a study table, to make a coffee table, so that intention or concept is not merely form, but it's something way deeper. And I love the spirit of projects like that. Yeah, I find it very meaningful.
So at higher level, the function from a true blue designer would incorporate these things, right? It's going to be deeper. It's going to be taking into consideration not just the human, functional request, but more like your well-being, your state, your state of mind, and even like the greater scheme of things is the airflow itself, letting the building breathe, purge, and all that. We are, as the term saying, the indoor generation. We have like a lot of formaldehyde. We have a lot of plastic in our body. And so it's kind of important to address that function through design.
Designer always struggled in between durability and functionality, as well as sustainability, and whether it can last over time, or whether does this hurt the environment for using this. Nowadays, we try to design a home where there's lesser reliance on AC. So a lot of materials that we try to introduce, like sofa materials, try to be as cool feeling as possible. I don't have the opportunity to design that in the architecture house, how I able to have cross ventilations, but sometimes I can, when during construction stage, I can try to motivate the owners to convince the architects, maybe design in this way can encourage more cross ventilation because it's north-south direction whatsoever, and make it more open concept. Sometimes there's always conflicting design concept or philosophy between architects and designers. Sometimes in terms of materials, or sometimes in terms of outlook. And when I try to evolve something that touches the exterior, may have to get owners involved. So sometimes it works, sometimes it don't work. When it don't work, you kind of regret that, it turned out this way, may not be something what I want. But we have to be adaptive.
Jackie, you're very big on the word adaptive. But I want to challenge you on that project that you have. The project that you have that's very permanent in its design. The Marina Bay Residences.
I know that project.
Yeah. You call it the futuristic project.
Yeah, of course, that project is highly controversial.
Got a lot of angles, right? A lot of curves.
A lot of curves. I don't think it's dangerous in a sense. It's just that because it's predominantly white, a lot of people will criticize that can it be maintained. When you have a white house, everything is white. Some people say it increase stress. A piece of strand of hair will make it very inner.
You see it from a mile away.
Yeah.
No, the other thing is the white is that for it to really work, it has to be very homogeneous. And then this is a materiality issue, right? Solid surface would age this way, UV would hit the floor another way, and then the paint, so and so forth. And then nothing is as homogeneous. Especially when talk about white, right? Yeah, it's not as homogeneous as we would. And then, of course, when you take a picture, you can do color correction. What I'm trying to say is that you're very big on the adaptive part in some of the things, but that particular project had all these very permanent and very aesthetic. And would it be functional? I mean, you were pursuing that function because the client said, I want a futuristic home. You got inspired by that movie called Passengers, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. And then after that, you came out of that space. But then it's not as adaptive, right? Isn't it?
We try to have quite a bit of adaptive furnitures. Of course, there's study rooms where it was a raised platform where the study table can be closed, like it's basically like spaceman concept. 10, 15 years ago, it was big. Not like now, it's everywhere.
15 years ago, this project.
Quite a while.
We old.
Oh, shit, man.
Is it still white color now?
Ouch.
The side table can be adaptive, can be closed, and my raised platform is to conceal, because I don't want a TV console, but actually a lot of wires is below this raised platform. And this raised platform is all full of storage where it can open. Of course, there's some elements and thought to it. The time solid surface is still highly debatable materials because there's a lot of not so good contractors who makes polyester with a lot of other materials on solid surface to make it very undurable.
Yeah.
But what I specify for this solid surface is a bit special. I did some research. The material that's already specs for the facade of the building, so it can last the sun and rain and it still maintain white as a facade of the building. So I use the exact solid surface code and the companies. Over that 10 years ago, a lot of concept that I envisioned didn't materialize. Actually, I want the owner to wake up by the TV image on the window. I don't want a typical alarm. I want it to be like
Circadian rhythm.
8 a.m. The film or the challenge ratio will be on the window. When you open up, you can watch the news immediately, and the news kind of subtly wake you up. I want that kind of lifestyle. But because at that time the technology wasn't that advanced, even though that's all over in YouTube, but it just didn't reach Singapore. And that time I tried to use it's long before pandemic, and I tried to use hands-free.
Before Alexa.
So for my bedroom door, there's no handles. Everything is using wave. Wave 1 time open, wave 2 time lock. So of course, there's a lot of trial and error over it. And of course, everything is new. The biggest regret is sometimes it works, sometimes it don't work. Then when it don't work, that's where function fails. So that project, it took quite a long time. I think it's like almost 1 year.
So confession, if you were to revisit that project now, like you fast forward 10 years to now, with given current technology and all that, you would change it. You would integrate those things that you want to do.
Redesign some parts. Then, of course, the essence of the space still kind of remains. And of course, if what we're going to do now, the cost is definitely much lower. Everything is more accessible. The smart home is also more stable. So that time with the smart home, we spend a bomb, consuming everything because everything is wired. So it's not easy to do. But because it's wired, it's not adaptable. It's not adaptive. And you need the person constantly, and you can't upgrade easily. So these are some of the things that we cannot foresee to make that project as future-proof as possible.
The reality is we will grow, and then we learn stuff, and then we will take that knowledge, right, to develop new functions or make it more functional in the sense that it's contextual. And it's a very wide spectrum of understanding different contexts, right? Like in the case of Jackie, he had a project just exactly like that, where the owner wanted this futuristic thing. But, in itself is like an oxymoron. How futuristic can it be, when you're limited by or inhibited by the technology of that time?
If I were just to intercept this conversation, like I remember that project a lot because it had a lot of eyeballs, very highly publicized project. I didn't realize you got that much criticism for it, even for the choice of color. Though I love that I could sit here next to you, going through that thought process behind the conception. It seemed like a project that was like a God-given kind of opportunity. We all have that, right? That kind of expendable budget.
1 year time frame.
That kind of time, budget, resource, that kind of client aspiration that could really take you far if you're invested into that same narrative. And clearly you were.
Yeah, I was told that I was the fourth designer to approach to do this project because the first three rejected. First is very difficult to do, and there's a limited resources in reaching that kind of effect.
I respond very, very strongly and very emotionally to this, because if you would tell me what my confession would be or regrets would be, it wasn't about that injury and workplace safety risk matter. It really is this misconception about the work just because it is documented or immortalized in a certain way and released in the media a certain way.
Expose.
Then you seem to be very front facing in the comments and critique lah. To many members of the public or those who don't know me very well or even clients, they know me as and kind of pigeonhole and define me as the aesthetic person. If you need that eyeball, that aesthetic sense, turn to Dennis for his opinion. I find that very hurtful, because I devote that same kind of thoughts and attention to how things work. And in our work, the function remains very invisible. Like even the wall of storage, we detail it such that it looks like wall claddings. The storage, the function, the wardrobes, most are invisible within the spaces. And that's what we like, because it kind of creates a space that, there's no moment which kills that illusion, that spatial sense, that feeling when you're sitting in there, be like, oh, my bed is next to a cupboard, which is next to like a basin, that kind of a feeling. Or that kind of perception.
I think, like, especially for Danny's case, right, is that even for it to, if I were to call it a spectacle, for it to design and have it appear to look like aesthetically like a spectacle, right, there's a lot of care and thought behind it. And in order to, even to achieve a spectacle, right, there are a lot of nuances and a lot of things to back it up such that it can appear in that shape, form, and function, So I challenge anyone. He's anything but aesthetic, Not that he's not aesthetic. I'm just saying, like, he's golf, right? He's definitely golf. But I think at his level, and I think Jackie will concur with me on that, is that it's profound lah. Your work has got a profound and deep element to it. We just have to find the right people to read between the lines. Yeah. Okay, it's time with this bowl, right? And what this segment is essentially me stirring the questions inside here. Who wants to answer the first one?
Okay, I can be the first one.
Okay. Do designers sometimes overcomplicate things just to justify their fees?
Some people use bombastic word, yes, maybe.
This is juxtaposed with this materiality.
It depends what kind of situation, commercial, residential, and whether they comparing you to the contractors, where contractor is free and you are charging design fee.
Wait. Sorry. I think you want to rephrase. That you're going to antagonize a lot of contractors. You both
He doesn't want you to be cancelled.
I want you to cancel.
Okay.
You think about this.
Contractors, they do provide solutions. They basically construct whatever they tell them to do. Where we will have a vision, we bring you to the design process, and we talk about movement. We talk about movement around the space. We talk about emotional connection, emotional atmosphere. We talk about lighting transition, interaction between space and objects, and even the human or the users. So sometimes we go beyond that.
You're trying to explain that there is a process, and those process would create more jobs for me, and then it's justified because these jobs require effort, time, resources to get to the point whereby I can deliver this. But to the end user, it's all fluff because I only want to see the end result. My end result equals to how much. Then if you're telling me that all these equals that you have to do this much work, of course, obviously you can't help. But if you were to compare, the line base in the quotation is that this is this, but then you're saying that this is worth so much more because I have to do all this work. And so your statement is that it's justified lah. It's justified, and that designers are guilty of that lah. Is that what you're saying?
Because my perception is not complicated, but of course to the layman it may sound complicated when you start using words like lighting transition and all this. To them they may feel that it's not a term that they use very often.
Maybe let's put it this way: to the person who value it, it's not complicated, lor.
Whether he's your target audience.
There's a level of sophistication. You spoke about time, resources, effort, and all that, but also experience behind that thought. You don't need to spend like 10 man-hours. It could be a 30-minute thing, but because you know what you're doing, right, it justifies that fee that goes into it. But this all can only be appreciated by an equally sophisticated client. So if someone comes to you and just wants execution, and I just want a table that's a square block, and then go and say, does this block need to be storage? Does it need to turn into? Then I would say maybe rethink. Like, not every scenario or design exercise requires that equal amount of intensity. Then it makes your life easier as well,
Okay, and then last, we're gonna do Danny's question. You still got your question. Looking back, was there a project that felt especially meaningful to you? And how did color play a part in that space?
Wow.
I recall you have a project. We have a very green, like a very nice wallpaper. I don't know whether it's painted the wallpaper on the ceiling.
Well, that was very long ago. It's a home for an Indonesian-based client. It was meaningful then. And to answer that question first, all projects are meaningful to me. In certain ways, I need to be emotionally attached to each of them. Maybe that's a problem or a mistake, right? Because then you have no professional separation, very invested, right? So that was a holiday home, in fact, it was a childhood home. He grew up in that home as a child, and thereafter, now he's grown up. I saw the apartment first with his mom, and thereafter with his wife, and later on, I think he has 2 kids. Yeah, so I saw him in those life transitions. So that being a holiday home or one that you don't live in every day, we get to exercise more creative license. And the idea of a ceiling fresco came about. And so that was not paint, but it was very custom. It was, we designed the graphic of, it's green, yes, it's palms. Right, and we use that to disguise a very deep beam. It's almost a meter deep, and it cuts the main living space very awkwardly. So we use that wallpaper in the ceiling, like an artwork, and lit it up and curved the edges to soften the lines. So that project was meaningful for me, not just because of the memories that it holds for the owner or the user. It's meaningful for me because it was one of the first projects that we started conceiving as almost like a hospitality project to really flesh out certain ideals and ideas. I got critique for that project. Someone said it's not
because it's not a norm.
Yeah, it cannot.
I mean, the entire wallpaper on the ceiling.
Yeah.
So it's very visually striking. I mean, to designers, fellow designers, we really appreciate it because we feel the meaning to it. But some people may feel because it's not a normal project.
Yeah, it stirred some feathers because it was
Controversial.
because it was still it's still defined as a residential project, and quite easily one could look at it and say, how can you design a home like that when it's so
wantonness, like don't tap like that.
Yeah, it has that very bold statement, and a home cannot be like that. It was fun also because we were quite fresh then and discovered the world of furniture, pulled in Jota goods for a lot of the pieces. A lot of nostalgic details, mid-century, almost old but also new. Then we also brought in art on the wall. If you remember below that green ceiling, There are furry things on the wall that's kind of like pom-poms but palms and really huge. So it was the start of how we start to really compose our spaces beyond what's permanent and trying to pull in brands and furniture and then art into these spaces. Yeah.
Nice. So last words for you guys. I think today's conversation has been it was supposed to be something somewhat superficial, like form and function. We know all about this when we are like learning design, but I choose to go deeper and try to kind of stir a little bit more about your memories and even grill you guys a little bit. Not sure whether I stir any hornet's nest or not. But any last words, thoughts? Do you enjoy the conversation?
It was fun. Like we touch on plenty of things and it all stemmed from something very basic, form, function. But we went deep. And the most rewarding thing was to get to know Jackie better.
Yeah, we didn't really talk
as a designer.
talk to each other for so long.
Yeah,
because we are always on the rush.
Right.
Move on from events to events and
Very
he's very
functional
popular. Everyone want to talk to him.
不要这样啦. I find it very fascinating. The between his work, that's the kind of futuristic work, and then the other spectrum when Jackie's designing libraries out of decommissioned school buses, and to third world cities in poverty. I find that spectrum very, very, very intriguing. There needs to be a next interview. Yeah, let's all sit together for that.
You see, the thing about Dennis is that he's very generous with sharing the spotlight. As much as I think that he can hog the limelight most of the time, but actually he's not. But then he's not afraid to share that limelight, which I think it's quite rare lah. It's really very rare these days. Yeah, really, really. I mean, we've mixed with a lot of designers, right? And then God knows about architects, right? You give them a microphone, you cannot stop talking, right? But
right.
in the case like Dennis, right, I think beyond the sophistry and all that is that he's very willing to share the limelight. That I appreciate in you.
I appreciate everyone.
To me, we talk about form and function. Between these two, it's not about choosing one or another. Sometimes designer need to choose the right compromise. Sometimes we do need to compromise. If you're able to choose the right compromise and prioritizing what really matters, use a creative way to manage the design integrity without losing the essence of space, then of course the whole thing can work about integration.
Love it. Like function is a currency. And then the form, right, is the things that do gel everything together. It's the thing that you're trading off with that currency. Nice.
Nice.
Yeah. So with that, right, we've come to the end of this very interesting episode with two of my favorite designers in Singapore. If I haven't said, I'm going to say it again. Right? Thanks,
wow.
Dennis. Thanks, Jackie, for
Ashley, for
joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Please hit the like, subscribe button, comment, share, zam until the button breaks. We also can. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.